Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the political route Lee Anderson has taken to becoming that rare beast, a Tory MP who got sacked for racism, as well as why he's not one of 3 or even 4 MPs to lose the whip this week, and whether he will now see his interest with joining Reform UK. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, 30p Lee Anderson, Leanderthal, whatever you want to call him, has rightly had the whip withdrawn for spreading racist conspiracy theories. Now, I'll give Rishi Sunak credit here for acting, but also I think there is still some criticism for certain aspects of the action. As always with these things, lots of people, myself included, thought that this was such an obvious step beyond acceptable boundaries that the whip should have been removed immediately. However, as it was removed within 24 hours, which is actually fairly speedy by the usual standards. But it is worth noting that according to Simon Hart's, the Tory chief whip, Lee Anderson did not have the whip removed for his racist comments. He had the whip removed for his refusal to apologise for them. The Conservatives had an opportunity here to make a little bit of a stand, but have instead chosen to say that, yes, on the one hand, we're removing the whip, which is the correct course of action, but we're doing it for the wrong reasons. But what caused Anderson to lose the whip when some of his more prominent backbench colleagues have been behaving arguably even worse? Suella Braverman, for example, was effectively the instigator of Anderson's comments. She said that Britain is being controlled by the Islamists. Anderson said he disagrees. He said, no, just London under Sadiq Khan. So saying London is under the control of what they call Islamists is worthy of having the whip removed. But saying that the whole of Britain is apparently fine. And no apology has been required or forthcoming from Braverman. What gives? Same with Robert Jenrick, who's been aping Braverman's comments himself. Or Truss, who's been in America going full MAGA insurrectionist. Not content with sharing a platform with people explicitly calling for the end of democracy in the US, she appeared to imply her support for doing so in Britain as well. Why have these 3 not lost the whip? Because Sunak feels he has the authority to boot Lee Anderson out, but not the others. And why is that? Because Lee Anderson's not really one of them, is he? He's useful for them, but he's not really one of them. At least not Braverman or Truss. I mean, with Jenrick, you could argue he might be able to get away with withdrawing the whip from Jenrick, but what's the point? If you withdraw the whip from Jenrick, you've got absolutely no argument for not doing so with Braverman. But it is worth noting that the Conservative Muslim Forum have expressed concerns about both Braverman and Jenrick and the support that's been shown for them by the leadership. Oliver Dowden, the deputy leader of the party, was doing interviews today in which he supported Lee Anderson. He didn't support the comments, admittedly, but he supported Lee Anderson. Oh, no, he wasn't being Islamophobic. And this was after the whip was removed. So it's just emphasising the fact that they haven't actually taken action for the Islamophobia. They've taken action because he was told to apologise because he was making things a bit awkward for them and he didn't do so. You get the impression that they actually want to see if this blows over so they can restore the whip to stop him going over to Reform UK. But in the here and now, Lee Anderson now becomes that very rare beast, a Tory losing the whip for racism. Not because Tories are generally not racist, but because it's generally acceptable. They'll lose the whip for COVID conspiracy theories, attending a game show, sexually assaulting someone or massive corruption, but in the last 2 cases, only if the papers make a fuss about it. But having the whip removed for racism, I can't remember too many cases of that. In fact, I'm going to be honest, I can't remember any cases of that, although I'm sure Anderson's not actually the first. And he has led a fairly checkered political history, hasn't he, really? Denied a regional position in Labour because of sexist comments he made. Then he jumped before he was pushed from the Labour Party altogether as a result of a racism he did in 2018, I think. Then immediately went to the Conservatives, who welcomed him with open arms and were so impressed that they made him their parliamentary candidate. That should have been the end of it in a place like Ashfield, but due to the stars aligning for the Tories, they were able to win. This despite the fact that Anderson was caught out in actively trying to con the voters he was trying to film himself persuading a voter to his way of thinking, but it turned out to be a mate of his who was just helping set it all up. He then shot his mouth off in Parliament as often as he could, unrestrained by Boris Johnson. Then about a year ago, when it was clear he was going to lose his seat, he decided he wanted more money. You know, despite him saying, oh, I managed to find on £26,000 a year. No, There's no way he was giving up a higher income that he was used to. So he started raising his profile on social media. He then went to the chief whip. Now, we didn't find out the details of this for months later, but he went to the chief whip and said, look, Simon, mate, Reform UK are trying to recruit me, and they're trying to do it with other Tory MPs as well. They've done this deal whereby if I joined them and then I lose the election, they'll pay the equivalent of my MP's salary for 5 years afterwards. That's a lot of money. And as I say, when this was eventually reported on, Reform UK denied it. Now, I actually believe that Anderson did make this up. And the reason is, Richard Tice makes no secret of the fact that he's actively trying to persuade Tory MPs to defect. But it doesn't make sense to bribe them to do so in the way that Anderson's claiming. And it's because it's not only would it be a lot of money, but quite illegal. Would you trust Tice without a written contract? And how could you enforce such a contract when it would be a serious criminal offence? Tice would never put down in writing something like that. Could go to prison. So no, Anderson was making it up so that the Tories would offer him something to persuade him to stay. So they offered him one of the many positions of deputy party chair. There's loads of them. It's a bit of a non-job, which nonetheless had the prestige that Anderson wanted. A month later, he had a job on GB News for £100,000 a year. Last month, he quit his position as deputy chair so he could vote against the government on the Rwanda bill, then claimed he didn't vote against the government because Labour MPs were sniggering at him, so he abstained instead. A week later, he said he'd wished he'd voted with the government and not quit as deputy chair, just to make himself look like a complete tit. And now he's done a racism too far and had the whip withdrawn. He presumably saw the way people like Braverman were getting away with much worse and thought it's safe enough. I've no doubt that this man, who is known to be friends with white supremacists, genuinely holds some of the views that he has. But I also think he's self-aware enough to have held his tongue if he thought there'd be consequences. The way I see it, Anderson knows he cannot win the election as a Conservative candidate, in Ashfield at any rate. In fact, in Ashfield, I don't think he can win at all. It has a very prominent independent group, which means the right-wing vote is split three ways, leaving Labour to take it back. But it does occur to me that if Lee Anderson did, after a discrete period, join Reform UK, there are certain advantages for him. First of all, it gives him the opportunity to stand elsewhere. There's no point in trying to stand in Ashfield. And there'd be no need as a Reform UK candidate to stand in Ashfield. It might make more sense, both for him and Reform UK, to put him in a seat with a more credible chance. There are plenty of red wall seats where Reform are polling way higher than in Ashfield. Another advantage is that it might help him keep his job at GB News. Now, last time I became aware, his viewing figures were quite poor. He got the job because of his prominent position in politics, but I think he probably needs the viewing figures to keep the job long term. Because after the election, he's no longer prominent in politics. He'll just be another gobshite. They're two a penny, and if he can't justify his role at the TV station with the audience he brings in, you'd imagine he will be dropped pretty quickly. But if he becomes a prominent campaigner for Reform UK, that maintains his sort of political prominence. That might be enough to keep him there. The question is, would Tice and Farage see long-term value in Anderson at Reform UK? He's been useful to them up until now, because he was speaking for the Conservatives when he was pushing exactly the sort of culture wars that have allowed Reform UK to hive off a load of Conservative votes. Consider that Anderson may not really fit into Reform UK much better than the Tories. Reform UK, they're sort of run by business owners, just like the Tories. Anderson may be useful to those on the far right, but he's seen as a serf as far as they're concerned. So the question is, can Anderson remain useful enough to anyone after he leaves Parliament? Or can Anderson believe that he can win as a Reform UK candidate? Do consider, as I say, he wouldn't have to stand for Ashfield. And remember, at the point at which Anderson became Deputy Party Chair, Reform UK, with YouGov, they were polling at about 6%. Now, YouGov, as well as all the online pollsters, seem to inflate Reform UK's share of the vote. So in reality, Reform UK were really polling right 3%. They were not much better than UKIP. Now they're polling on about 13% with the same pollster. In reality, it's probably a bit less. You might believe it's about 9 or 10%. But it's still, they've since Lee Anderson, I know this is not the only event, but since Lee Anderson became deputy chair, Reform UK have effectively, I would say in real terms, trebled their share of the vote. And that has been, I think, because the Conservatives kept pushing the sort of rhetoric which helped Reform UK have a say. It wasn't all Lee Anderson, Suella Braverman did her bit and a few others as well. But Lee Anderson is responsible in no small part for the rise of Reform UK in the past year. The Tories should be well shot of him. But is he really one of them? Like, you look at the major players in the Conservative Party, as well as the major players in Reform UK, they're all millionaires. Very few of them came from ordinary backgrounds. Like Liz Truss is a rare exception. And none of them have come from low-income backgrounds like Anderson. I'm sure Reform UK would welcome him right now because he'd be a Trojan horse for them to get into the House of Commons, raising their profile further. But will he be able to get any assurances for the future from them? And will he be able to trust them to deliver on those assurances? Because I see a man who was used to living on a low income and suddenly was being paid 6 times as much with subsidised food and drink, and his ego fed with the feeling of importance that comes from being an MP and a TV gobshite. He will not want to give that up, but given that he stands little chance of engineering an election win, and that he's not even an entertaining gobshite, so struggles to attract good viewing figures as far as I can tell, he's going to need to work quickly to secure his future income. But will it be with Reform UK, or will the Tories keep dangling carrots for him to hang around until they can bring him back? But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.